So often we see Middle English literature attempt to be retold in the format of film, and so often these films fail at capturing the beauty of the original piece of literature. And I don't think there's any example that shows this off better than Sword of the Valiant failing to capture the original beauty of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is a Middle English poem, and it's a very beautiful poem. And Sir Gawain and the Green Knight explores a lot of different themes, but it explores the virtues of a knight, the shortcomings that come along when trying to achieve said virtues, and the reputation of the Round Table, Arthur's court, being tested. And when looking at Sword of the Valiant, it fails to capture any of these ideas. In fact, Sword of the Valiant fails so hard at capturing these virtues and these ideas of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight that some medievalists would go on to say that Sword of the Valiant made Monty Python and the Holy Grail look lavish. And this is quite crazy because Monty Python and the Holy Grail is a satire of the whole entire genre. And if a serious work of media makes a piece of satire look lavish, then I think it's fair to say that its failings are pretty obvious and pretty severe. And from this leads me on to state the thesis of this whole entire video. And that thesis is, rather than being a faithful adaptation of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Sword of the Valiant parodies the medieval poem, reducing the game from a lesson about the pride of the Round Table to a simplistic exercise in cinematic violence and intrigue. And this thesis statement leads us into the main points of this video. Within the poem, we are told why Morgan Le Fay set up the existence of the game in the first place. And this is told to us in the statement of, to make trial of your pride. And this is talking about Gawain. So clearly the game exists to take trial of Gawain's pride, but it also goes on to say, and to judge the truth of the great reputation attached to the Round Table. So within the poem, the original story, the game clearly existed to test the pride of the Round Table. In the poem, not only are we told that the game exists to be a lesson to the Round Table about their pride, but we also see the Round Table learn its lesson through Gawain returning to the Round Table after his confrontation with the Green Knight. When Gawain returns, he tells Arthur's Round Table about his failure and his quest and everything surrounding what he's gone through as a purpose. He tells them with the purpose of checking their pride. And we even see King Arthur's court start to wear green girdles in remembrance of the failure of Gawain. And I'm not the only one that comes to this conclusion about a central point of the poem being about testing the pride of Arthur's court. A medievalist writes about this regarding Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It is Camelot's uncertain future that hovers over the poem, linking Gawain's destiny with that of the kingdom. Sword of the Valiant completely guts this entire aspect about Arthur's court learning a lesson about their pride. While King Arthur's court does exist from the very first scene, and we do see his court being very prideful, as in
Yuletide, we celebrate the thickening of our bellies and the softening of our muscles. Has your valor fled entirely in these times of peace? Is this the court whose knights were feared throughout Christendom? I'm bored. Bored with you all.
Gawain never returns back to Arthur's court in the movie. In fact, the movie ends with Leonette turning into a bird, and that's just where the movie cuts off. Gawain not returning, he can't share any of the failures of his quest, even though in the movie him taking the girdle is not a failure. But he can't share any of his quests, and King Arthur's court is never checked for their pride. And this theme being cut from the movie also calls into question the existence of the game in the first place in the movie. As in the book, the game played a grand role in Morgan Le Fay trying to keep Arthur's court from being too prideful and falling into that. In the movie, the game must solely exist to test this lowly squire of Gawain, because Gawain is a squire in the movie. So its purpose, the game's purpose in the movie seems almost meaningless. In the poem, the trade of blows between Sir Gawain and the Green Knight did not have to be fatal. This is supported by the fact that when the Green Knight lays out the rules to the court, he in nowhere mentions where the blow has to take place. In fact, when he mentions the rules, this is what he says. to strike a blow fearlessly and take one in return. Furthermore, when the Green Knight walks into the court, he is holding in one hand a holly branch and the other hand an axe, which represents the choice that the court has to make when deciding the blow. The holly branch in one hand means it represents peace, and in the other hand the axe represents death. And within the poem, Gawain clearly chooses the fatal blow, so choosing the axe, death, to sort of cheat the game by not allowing a returned blow by killing the Green Knight. Within Sword of the Valiant, Gawain's choice of dealing a fatal blow completely does not exist. When the Green Knight of Sword of the Valiant is laying out the rules for the game, he describes it as a cut for a cut and clearly points at his neck.
A cut for a cut.
And as he goes on to mock the court when no one volunteers, he says a line, "My neck grows cold."
My neck grows cold.
This enforcement of a fatal blow by the Green Knight strips Gawain of his choice and therefore his failure in choosing to cheat the game. The movie rids Gawain from the suffering that knowing his choice is the choice that caused him to make his seemingly suicidal journey. And this completely strips Gawain of his internal conflict with his own pride. In the original poem, there's a deal between Bertilac and Gawain that whatever Gawain gains while staying with Bertilac, he must give to Bertilac. And Gawain fails this deal by taking a girdle from Lady Bertilac that he believes will save his life. Later on, we learn that this girdle being offered to Gawain was all part of this test, and Gawain has failed by being dishonest. Which quickly shows us that Gawain's character is flawed. But Gawain does come to regret taking the girdle, and it weighs on him very heavily, and he learns something character-wise. We can see this being shown when Gawain says, "This belt caused a scar that I bear on my neck. This is a token of the dishonesty I was caught committing." This is what a medievalist has to say about the effect that taking the girdle has on Gawain. Gawain assumes the wearing of the girdle is a sign of his imperfection. Within Sword of the Valiant, there's no longer a deal between Bertilac and Gawain, and Lady Bertilac is replaced by Lynette, a prior love interest of Gawain in the movie. So when Lynette offers Gawain the girdle in the movie, there is now no longer a reason for Gawain not to take the girdle, therefore causing him to make no failure and never learn from his mistakes, causing no character growth from the Gawain of the movie at all. In fact, by the looks of it, later in the movie, when Gawain confronts the Green Knight for their final confrontation, it seems that the green girdle is the thing that saves Gawain's life. This deconstruction of Gawain's deal with Bertilac caused there to be no failure within Gawain's honesty, nothing for him to have learned from, and therefore causing his character absolutely no development. At the end of the poem, Gawain learns that he is not to be decapitated, but he still suffers at his failure of taking the girdle. Gawain is able to use his failures to learn from them, passing the Green Knight's pride test and proving that there is still hope for the Round Table. While in Sword of the Valiant, Gawain has no check of his pride from this final battle, and the role of the Green Knight seems to be diminished. Instead of being the helper of the Round Table and Gawain by checking their pride, he seems to just take the role of some sort of villain that did it all for this demented pleasure. Gawain learns entirely no lesson in this final confrontation. In fact, Gawain says this:
"I was a fool to ever play your game."
And as Blanche puts it, if he were a fool to play, does that mean that Arthur's cowardly knights at the outset were wise? Gawain then proceeds to kill the Green Knight in a fight scene.
What? You tell me when my game is over? I make the rules, boy. I make the rules.
Instead of the Green Knight being a helper to Arthur's court by checking their pride, it seems that his only purpose in Sword of the Valiant is to be a villain and teach no moral lesson whatsoever. So, in conclusion, Rather than being a faithful adaptation of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Sword of the Valiant parodied his medieval poem, reducing the game from a lesson about the pride of the Round Table to a simplistic exercise in cinematic violence and intrigue. Sword of the Valiant completely strips Gawain of any sort of internal conflict, but make him never have any sort of shortcoming. In the movie, Gawain is forced to deal a fatal blow to the Green Knight. Gawain nor Arthur's court's pride are ever put into check. The game between Gawain and Bertilac ceases to exist, therefore Gawain never fails short in his honesty, and Gawain's final confrontation with the Green Knight cements the fact that the game is pointless as it turns into a fruitless fight scene. Sword of the Valiant fails at every aspect of recreating Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The movie fails to portray the most important aspect, which is the game between Gawain and the Green Knight. The film falls short of the message of the poem and feels more akin to a campy 80s action film. Sword of the Valiant is a disgrace to the artistic work it tries to resell.